The world's largest oil-producing nations have reached an agreement on boosting production after a rift between two key members threatened to stall efforts. OPEC nations cut oil production by almost 10 million barrels a day at the start of the pandemic when demand plummeted. As the global economy started to recover, OPEC gradually restored output by almost 50%. But negotiations on a deal to further increase output exposed a rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The Emirates called Saudi proposals to extend the arrangements unjust. Now, a compromise giving the UAE and others a higher production quota has paved the way for the latest deal. OPEC's going to begin further easing cuts from August.
What bonds us together is way much beyond what you may imagine. I'm sorry that you've never picked it up this way, but it's good that we give you this opportunity to think differently and look at us differently. We differ here and there, but we bond.
This group is a strong one that is committed to our cause. We put into our consideration all the producers' fear and worries in order to stay balanced and to start the recovery process from the coronavirus pandemic. The UAE supports the consensus reached by the group. We will stay committed to such a consensus.
Cornelia Meyer is an oil and gas analyst, as well as the CEO of Meyer Resource, and she's joining us now from Bern in Switzerland. Thank you very much indeed for being with us on Al Jazeera. One would imagine that if there's an increase in production, we will automatically see to some degree some changes in prices at the fuel pumps. Who are going to be the big winners in this kind of deal?
Well, I think the big winners in this deal is basically both the producers and the consumers, because what we had up to now is we didn't know whether we would get this, gradual easing of production cuts, and the market is currently undersupplied to the tune of 2 million barrels a day, and the economy is starting to power ahead. So this was very touch and go, because one didn't know will one get no further increases, and if there are no further increases, will discipline amongst the 23 OPEC plus members go out of the water, at which point obviously we would have had a race to the bottom. So now we know we have predictability in uncertain times. We know the agreement will go through the end of next year. We also know that they will, they will release 400,000 barrels a day every month. Obviously, it will be reviewed every month because, given the pandemic, you never know what happens next.
There are, of course, some members like Russia and Iraq, for example, who are really absolutely dependent on the income they get from production. Given the fact that this production is going to be increased, what does it mean for countries like them?
Well, for countries like them, that's very good news. And you saw that the UAE got about half of what they wanted in terms of having the level raised, the baseline raised from which you calculate the cuts. But both Saudi and Russia got 500,000 barrels a day, so they could up their production too, as did Iraq. And for Iraq, this is actually very good because as you rightly pointed out, they do need the oil income. They have continuously overproduced. They never adhere to the quotas. So that helps them be a little bit more compliant.
Let's talk just a little bit about this dispute that happened between the UAE and Saudi. How unusual was that, given that OPEC generally tends to try to present a unified face? The very fact that these two key members were in disagreement must have been pretty significant.
Well, it was significant, and one could see this coming last year in about July, August time, September time. The UAE substantially overproduced over its allowed quota, and what happened is that the baseline has been calculated as of November 2018. But since then, the UAE, like nobody else, has invested in upping their production capacity. So they say, look, we've invested billions of dollars. We have new agreements with international players. We need to be able to monetize some of this. So that was a real dispute between the two. And what was unusual is that it was carried out in front of the world's television cameras. Both His Excellency Mr. Al-Mazroui, the Energy Minister of the UAE, and His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, the Energy Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, sort of briefed CNBC and Bloomberg and so on. So that was quite unusual, because generally there always are some conflicts, but generally they are sort of kept away from the press.
Cornelia Meyer, we appreciate you being with us on Al Jazeera, giving us the benefit of your expertise. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Rob, for having me.